Chairman, thank you. Gentlemen, thanks very much. You've put a lot of years in to be able to serve your nation and to be able to serve people, and I appreciate you stepping through this process. It's not a fun process to be able to go through for you or your family, and so I appreciate very much the work that you've already done to be able to prepare for this. I'm going to walk through several questions just as rapidly as I can. Scott, there was a massive data breach at OPM a decade ago. Every federal worker has still struggled with that and still feels vulnerable because of that. You've worked with data for a long time and have done a lot of great work on that. What are you going to do when you step into this role, if confirmed, to be able to help protect that integrity of that federal data?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. I certainly do not want to see a repeat of what happened, obviously, many years ago. One of the first things that I will do is do a full business review, not just of all of our functions, but certainly data privacy and data protection. And so that will be one of the first orders of business when I hopefully have the opportunity to serve.
Great, that'd be very helpful. There's been a lot of conversation about federal workers and being removed through the process, but we have just as much of a struggle, quite frankly, on the other side. There are 120 different hiring authorities. And every agency and entity says, I hate all of them on it because of the complexity. We have made the federal workforce incredibly complicated, both to hire or to remove or to be able to do oversight through the process. I want to talk about just the hiring portion of it, because we will get back to doing hiring in the days ahead for key roles, while we're in the process of also reducing the size of federal government as well. What are your thoughts on decreasing the complexity of the federal hiring process?
Yeah, so as you may know, I think the president put out an executive order saying that we have a target now of 80 days to make sure from kind of imposition of a role to actually have somebody in seat. And one of the things that I expect OPM to do is to go through the entire hiring process. So everything from, quite frankly, I think you and I have talked to us, we do a really poor job of hiring people out of universities, for example. Right. We don't utilize our internships for full-time employment. There's all kinds of things I think we can do and we should do, both to streamline the process and, quite frankly, to ensure that we get the highest quality applicants through the process very quickly.
I think it would be shocking to a lot of the American people that they find out, because a lot of people have served as an intern in some spot or as a journeyman in a different role and everything else, and we just assume those folks are trying to be able to get to that job. But in the federal workforce, that's incredibly difficult to move from an intern that some supervisor may say, gosh, they're really good at this, we should bring them on. And it's, yeah, they've got to go through a 120-day process, and by that point, they're gone on it. And so it is a real challenge that's got to be able to be fixed. Telework is one of those things that there's been a lot of bashing on telework. But quite frankly, I have spoken out frequently on an issue for things like spouses of federal law enforcement or for active duty military, that they, by their job and their family, move every 3 years. It's very difficult for them to get to careers. There are some jobs that you can do by telework, where you're answering a phone and answering a question, for instance. You could do that literally from any place on earth. This is a great opportunity for people that are already serving in our military or serving in law enforcement for their spouse to also develop a career if they get into that job. That's one example of many on that. How would you handle the supervision of telework once we actually balance this out?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. As you know, the president also has issued an executive order on that. And even in that executive order, his entreaty to OPM was, let's make sure we do this in a way that recognizes some of these cases that you're describing. So I want to make sure as we provide guidance through OPM that we do recognize, to your point, there may be instances where it does make sense to have a policy, particularly in the case of military spouses or, as you mentioned, other law enforcement individuals. So I think we need to approach those as individual matters.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that. Eric, all you had to do was have Don Nichols introduce you, and I'm done. Okay, that was it. So once that occurs, I'm ready to vote, to be able to go from there. But
thank you,
thanks for your many years of service, and you've served in so many ways for the American people. Many folks have not met you before, but they got a chance to be able to hear a great introduction of you and to be able to hear just how much you have done behind the scenes for so many people for so long. So thanks for that. Thanks for stepping into this role on it. You and I have talked about the federal program inventory. This was something that started years ago that we finally got passed in the first Trump administration. To their credit, the Biden OMB office continued the work behind the scenes for the federal program inventory. It's still unfinished, but we still cannot say everything the federal government does. We cannot ask, the American people cannot do a quick internet search to say how many job training programs does the federal government do. We don't know on that. So the federal program inventory is incredibly important to be able to finish out. If we're going to fight duplication, we got to be able to see it. So what are your thoughts on finishing this out for the federal program inventory?
Well, thanks for the question, Senator. And right, you can't manage what you can't measure. And right now, we just don't know. And that is incredibly exasperating to anybody going through line by line of the federal budget, trying to determine whether or not we've got it right. So my commitment is to drive the team to finish that inventory, to provide that roll-up and ultimately that information to Congress, to taxpayers, the general public, and then from there help Congress and the director make decisions about what's appropriate in the federal fiscal envelope that ultimately Congress and the executive branch are going to
Great,
set.
thanks. Two things that you and I talked about, I'm not going to ask you a question on, but just mention again publicly. One is making sure that OMB is actually pushing on our contractors and subcontractors to actually use the E-Verify. That is something that is required by federal law, and my understanding is it's just not being done. So we want to make sure that federal tax dollars for federal projects are actually going to American citizens on it. And the other one is to have OIRA review for independent agencies. They're not a fourth branch of government. They do need to have some oversight in that process. Thank you.
Thanks for